On January 30th, 1945, it was a bitterly cold night on the Baltic Sea. The air temperature was about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water temperature was around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so not exactly the water you'd want to take a dip in. But that didn't stop the Soviet submarine S-13, led by Captain Alexander Marinesko, from patrolling the waters off the Stolt Bank near the Pomeranian coast for enemy shipping. At around 7 to 8 o'clock p.m., the submarine spotted the large silhouette of an ocean liner paired with several bright lights sailing relatively slowly across the dark horizon. After spotting the ship, Captain Marinesko ordered the S-13 to position itself between the coast and the large vessel. The reasoning behind this was because an attack from the direction of the coast would be largely unexpected. Then, at around 9 o'clock p.m., the S-13 shot off a series of 4 torpedoes toward the ocean liner, 3 of which hit their mark, and a series of explosions slammed the large ship. That large vessel that the Soviet submarine S-13 had just torpedoed was the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, a German military transport ship which was carrying an estimated 10,000 passengers. When the 3 torpedoes struck the ship, there was immediate chaos. Passengers panicking, and many of them being swept overboard by the explosions and the movement of the ship, or some simply just leapt overboard into the icy waters to avoid being caught in the fires raging aboard the ship. Aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff, there were enough lifeboats and rafts for roughly 5,000 out of the 10,000 passengers, but, in a tragic twist of fate, one of the sections of the ship hit by the torpedoes was the crew quarters, which is where most of the crew was at the time, along with most of those who were trained to launch the lifeboats. Adding to this, a lot of the equipment was frozen to the deck, so this effectively meant that the lifeboats weren't a valid option anymore. Within about 40 minutes of being struck by the torpedoes, the Gustloff listed heavily onto its side, and after only roughly 10 minutes, the ocean liner sank beneath the waves. Throughout the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff, 9 vessels took part in the rescue efforts that followed. Among these ships was the German torpedo boat and escort vessel Löwe. This vessel was actually the only ship escorting the Wilhelm Gustloff on the night of its sinking. Out of the estimated 10,000 passengers, only a mere 1,239 passengers were rescued from the frigid waters. Now, I want to touch on the subject of whether or not Captain Marinesko of the S-13 committed a war crime by sinking this ship. It's still debated on occasion, however, it should be fair to point out that there was no real way for Captain Marinesko to have known that the vessel he was targeting was a refugee ship. This is because in November of 1940, the Wilhelm Gustloff was repainted from its hospital ship colors of white and green to a standard naval gray. This would have made it difficult to discern its purpose. There is also the point that the Wilhelm Gustloff was carrying an estimated 1,000 German naval personnel, as well as the presence of anti-aircraft guns and other weaponry aboard the ship, which to many constitutes the Wilhelm Gustloff as a valid military target and thus not necessarily a war crime, despite the horrible tragedy of all those aboard. There is also a counter-argument to that narrative that may suggest Captain Marinesko may have decided to sink the ship whether he suspected it was a refugee ship or not. You see, back in the Soviet Union, Captain Marinesko was in a substantial amount of trouble for leaving his post for a 3-day New Year's celebration, for which he faced a court-martial. However, he was granted one final patrol aboard his submarine, the S-13, to redeem himself and avoid facing the music. So, on January 11th, 1945, Captain Marinesko and the S-13 departed for patrol in the Baltic Sea. So, when he spotted the Wilhelm Gustloff on January 30th, 1945, the pressure was mounted against him to sink the ship. Again, I'd like to point out that this is mostly speculation, as there's no real way to know what he was thinking before the sinking, aside from what he was thinking after the sinking in a log he wrote in his journal. Quote, "I saw the silhouette of an ocean liner. It was enormous. It even had some lights showing. There and then I decided it was about 20,000 tons, certainly not less. and I was quite sure it was packed with men who had trampled on Mother Russia and were now fleeing for their lives. It had to be sunk, I decided, and the S-13 would do the job. End of quote. Now, I want to backtrack a few years to before the onset of World War II. The Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't originally built to be a military transport ship. Like several other vessels of the time, it was once an ocean cruise liner. It was officially launched in May of 1937, with Adolf Hitler being in attendance. Named after the former leader of the Swiss Nazi Party, yes, Swiss as in Switzerland, the Wilhelm Gustloff was the first ship constructed for the German Labor Front's Strength Through Joy program. The ship initially had enough capacity to hold roughly 1,900 people, including its 400 crew members. However, one does not simply book a spot on this ocean liner, since the passengers aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff were specifically chosen by the Nazi Party. After its maiden voyage in March of 1938, the Wilhelm Gustloff served a variety of functions besides being an ocean cruise liner. It was used as a polling location for those voting on the annexation of Austria. It also served as a transport ship for German troops returning from the Spanish Civil War. Then, during the onset of World War II, it was used by the German Navy as a hospital ship throughout the Baltic Sea. Then, later on, from 1940 to 1945, the Gustloff was docked in Gdynia, Poland, to serve as a sort of barracks for German soldiers, until finally on January 25, 1945, when the Wilhelm Gustloff was ordered to take on refugees fleeing the Soviet Army's advance in the region. And by January 29th, the ship had counted nearly 7,956 refugees boarding the vessel, but had stopped counting shortly after. It's claimed by witnesses that nearly 2,000 more refugees boarded the packed ship after counting had finished. Then, around noon of January 30th, the Wilhelm Gustloff left port, and that's when we get to the topic of this video. The sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff is widely regarded as the deadliest maritime disaster in history. I'd also like to point out that there are many aspects to this story that I didn't cover in today's video. So, if you'd like the full story, I strongly encourage you to visit the sources linked in the description below. With that, I hope you have a great day, and goodbye. Throughout the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff, they often got notifications on their phone, which amplified the tragedy of the event. Oh my